USS Long Beach, the last cruiser, the US Navy's last cruiser. It should have been a heavy cruiser. Instead, it's a light cruiser. It should have been so many things, but it's not. It's a test bed for so many designs which come afterwards, for so many ideas which come afterwards, and this ship really does matter. It's going down the path that will lead to Aegis. It's going down the path that will lead to so many of the concepts which are critical to this day. And it was this unique vessel. It was a status vessel because it was a nuclear cruiser long before anyone else had a nuclear cruiser. And let's be honest, that's a pretty darn unique sight to see. You see that coming. You know that ship. There ain't any other like it. But again, it is a light cruiser. Why do I keep saying light cruiser? In this period, there aren't any heavy cruisers being built. Well, it comes from that style of hull and that style of design. And this is part of the problem, I would say, with the Long Beach. Is when we start looking into its stats. It is, of course, launched in 1959. The closest contemporary heavy cruiser in US Navy construction is the Des Moines class. Now, they displaced 17,500 tons in standard, 21,200 and something tons in full load, and had a length of 218.4 metres overall and a beam of 23.3 metres and a draft of 6.7 metres. Long Beach. Well, her length is 219.84 metres, which makes her slightly longer. And yet her beam is 21.79 metres. Slightly thinner. Why does this make her a light cruiser? Because that's the proportions. I would expect, if she's that much longer, if she's making a heavy cruiser style hull, which is built more basically as you go up the cruiser sizes, this is a debate over gun stability, platform stability versus its sort of speed, and basically the length to beam ratio tends to be greater in light cruisers than in heavy cruisers. So, as she's longer than a heavy cruiser, which is contemporaneous, but is thinner, and also, let's be honest, lighter, she's a light cruiser. And you can also hull design, shaping, all these things, it's a light cruiser. And it's sensible to test out guided missile cruisers on light cruisers, and that was certainly what the US Navy were following on. The guided missile cruisers as a whole seem to mostly come from the light cruiser line, especially ones which are built. And by these, of course, I'm talking about the vessels which are converted mainly from Cleveland-class light cruisers into sort of Galveston, Little Rock, Oklahoma, Providence, Springfield, Topeka, all these conversions which are converted into guided missile cruisers. Long Beach is the only built guided missile cruiser, and naturally she comes from the light cruiser line and shaping. And I think this is where some of the problem starts to come in with her, because I think when they're originally designing that, it probably makes sense to go with the light cruiser hull. The conception, the idea, they wanted to have nuclear cruisers. They were going for this raging new technology, this really cool system, all these powerful radars. Yeah, go for the light cruiser hull. You can probably build it slightly quicker. You have existing light cruiser hulls which are in service as missile ships, so you understand the stresses and what you're putting into the ship. All great. Longer term, there's a problem. Longer term, if you'd had the heavy cruiser shaping and hull, you'd have had that much more space inside the ship for doing that many more improvements. And whilst really long term, when they decide that they don't want to have nuclear powered vessels in anything but aircraft carriers and submarines because of the expense, that might not change, but the odds are a more useful ship, a ship which is more easily adapted and upgraded, and tends to be a beamier ship, is easier to adapt and upgrade, might well have been replicated, which might mean there's more of them. I think one of the reasons why the nuclear surface ship fleet proves so easy to dispense with is because really they're not that high profile like the carriers, and B, there aren't that many of them like the submarines. So it's kind of like the Royal Navy and various other navies experience. When you have only a few of something, it's very easy for people to go, ooh, we'll just lop that bit off and that's a bit of salami sliced away. Now, she was built by Fall River Shipyard, which used to advertise as Quincy built the best thing you can say about a ship. I'm not sure if the Camel Lairds and a few other yards around the world would agree with that statement, but carry on, it's always nice to go with it. And they are a good shipyard with a long experience. Saying that, considering the original yard they are based from started in 1883 in Braintree, moved to its final location at Quincy Point in 1901. In 1913 had become part of the Bethlehem Steel organisation, would remain within that grouping till 1963 when it was taken over by General Dynamics, and would stay in operation with them till 1986, so did 103 years of service. They're not exactly doing badly. They built CV-2, USS Lexington, and also CV-16, USS Lexington. You know, might as well. They built several cruisers, several battleships. They are an experienced and capable company. So going to them with a nuclear cruiser makes sense. In fact, going to them with a nuclear cruiser probably makes more sense than pretty much any other option they could go for. Because this yard knows what it's doing in terms of building ships, and the rest they can bring in. Now, I mentioned at the beginning that this was part of the first real set developments that lead to Aegis. They're not very good. Please note, I'm not going to claim they're brilliant. They're quite good for their time. They're not really very good. This is the trouble sometimes. I do get into this discussion on these videos in that occasionally I will say something, it was good. People go, well, compared to this, this, and this, which came later, it's terrible. Yeah. These are first gen of what they are. And you can see this one is fitted on a similarly square construct. This, of course, is on the first ever nuclear carrier. Yes. This is Enterprise, Miss Ireland. And similarly, as with Long Beach, it's a square construct which has these four panels on it. They are the ANSPS 33 and the ANSPS 32. They are, well, how do I put this? The 32 can be described as a horizontally wide rectangular antenna for air surveillance, and the 33 is a vertically narrow rectangular antenna for target tracking. So you can pretty much work out which is which and what's doing which. Ay, caramba. And eventually they would be replaced in service by the ANSPS 48E. But you know, well, it's nice to get things upgraded eventually. So here's the concept. You're building a nuclear cruiser, here is the concept, and that looks sexy as anything, let's be honest. All smooth lines. I can tell you now, the naval architect who produced this one liked to wear a scarf. Liked to walk around thinking they were, I don't know, Dirk Bogart or something, with a very cool, soft top car. Pulls down, wind in their hair, scarf billowing, driving along. They think they are the bee's knees. They think they are designing the future. When they see the Thunderbirds, they go, they're copying my designs. Saying that though, it's not necessarily a bad design. However, you'll notice there are some things missing. There are some interesting things missing. For example, first thing you might notice missing, just looking at it going, helicopter facility. What are they? What is going on here? It's always worthwhile thinking about these things because helicopters matter. Now, I have to admit, again, this is the US Navy, and occasionally their love for the helicopter doesn't show through at the beginning. It's sad. It should do, but it takes time, and, well, she's a vessel of her time, and her time is the late 1950s. Because let's be honest, with procurement, she's ordered in 1956, which means design work, well, again, we have an old discussion about this. There are some people who will date the official design work to 1954. There are others who will go back earlier. Myself, I would be one of the ones who would say, this is one of those things which no one's going to jump into with the official jump in. So it's going to have started off earlier. And it's going to be a very, very complicated ship. Because look at everything that's gone into it. Displacement, 15,540 tons, as already discussed. Length, 219.84 meters. Beam, 21.79 meters. Draft, 9.32 meters. It's a light cruiser with a deep draft. 2 C1W nuclear reactors. Unlimited range. Theoretically, let's be honest, the thing about nuclear reactors is they don't really have unlimited range. It's just you measure that range in years rather than nautical miles. And go, this is unlimited range. It means it's going to run out in about 25 to 50 years. You can keep it going for that long, but that's about at which point its chemistry is going to break down to the point it's not going to create enough power for you to do what you want to do with it. So yeah, you're measuring its range in years rather than miles. Armament. Starts out with twin Terrier guided missile launchers. Ah, the Terrier. Honestly, there are... The US Navy has this obsession with the word standard. They liked the standard battleship. They like the standard missile. In the 1950s, they go through this expression with T for missiles. So you have Terrier, you have Talos, and you sit there and go, okay. Well, it's like the Royal Navy. There aren't even land versions produced of most of the missiles they use, yet still they insist on putting C in front of them. So, has anyone seen the Land Cat? Huh? And definitely no one produced the Land Slug. No one wanted that. What have we on today? The Sea Scepter. Land Scepter now as well. You sit there and go, okay, so someone decided this as a branding decision many, many decades ago. And they've just kept with it. Really? As her career went on, they did upgrade her. And she received things like armor box launchers for Tomahawk cruise missiles and launchers for 8 Harpoon missiles. One of the most interesting things is, of course, the 5-inch 38 guns, which were fitted. There is the famous involvement of President Kennedy in this. The fact that Kennedy was apparently the one who said, no, we need to have guns on this ship, just in case. Does kind of fit with if you go back to the concept and you sort of look at this one and you go, that's very clean, very missile, very clean. No real things which look maybe like guns, possibly something on the stern. But no. They sensibly do fit guns. Because, well, missiles are not necessarily the most reliable tools, even in the 1960s. And having the guns as backup make a lot of sense when you've got something this size and this capability going out into combat. 5-inch 38 going for that, to me, has always suggested that the US Navy was more playing on the image of the gun than the reality of the gun. Because if you think about it, in the 1950s, the 1960s, you surely should have been able to come up with a better gun than the venerable, very, very good, but definitely venerable 5-inch 38. So, as said, primary weapon, the RIM-8 Talos. Operational range, well, 241 kilometers. The 8A, 92 kilometers. Then you work out which one was probably fitted to Long Island. Or rather, Long Beach. I keep wanting to call it Long Island. Ay, caramba. Flight ceiling, 24.4 kilometers. Maximum speed, Mach 3. It's not a bad missile for its time. It still is a bit of a flying minivan, but it's not a bad missile for its time. Long Beach is well armed for its time. Talos is not perhaps the, how do I put this, the best weapon, but it's not a bad weapon. And let's be honest, if you do get hit by something which weighs roughly 3,400 pounds, that's 1,500 kilograms, 1.5 tons, going at Mach 3, doesn't really need an explosive to have an impact on you, honestly. At that point, there isn't going to be much of an aircraft left. But they had a 211 kilogram high explosive, that's 465 pounds, or a W30 nuclear warhead with a 2 to 5 kiloton range. Range of decision of explosive power. So, yeah, in which case you launch one per bomber task force, I presume, and it just goes flying into them. They all think, the missiles missed us. Boom! Oh, good lord, we're all gone. That is the other thing you see at this point in this period. You have a compensation. Today we have we have gone to almost the scene of the reverse. In that we are looking at things and going, we can make them target so precisely. We need barely any explosive, any firepower at all. We will just depend on our ability to precision strike. We will take out the golden screw, the golden bolt, the golden whatever, paperclip that holds this all together, and it will all fall apart with just a minimal of force. In this period, they went, we have this weapon which can go a very long way, very fast. We have no idea how good our targeting is, though. Okay. Let's slip in the biggest warhead known to mankind, so everything that we could possibly want to take out will be in the kill radius of it. Sounds good. So, lunch? Lunch. There's this new place called McDonald's. Really? Sounds decent. Let's go try. This is the world of the 1950s, 1960s when it comes to these missile developments. And yes, I have to admit, because you have to be slightly more careful when you start talking about missiles, start getting closer and closer to current day, and talking about current technologies. And also there are people around who use them, and their recollections of systems sometimes differ from the official records. You do have to be careful in how you approach these things. That's why I tend to use the details which are, if I'm going with anyone, I go with the ones which are available on the most publicly visible website known to mankind. Use that as my details for these sort of discussions, because then I know that there's no one going to be knocking on the door going, Dr. Clarke, where did you find out this information? Who told you? And do you mind coming down with us to your station? It's always better to be careful. And of course, the Rim 2 Terrier. sorry, it's just the name Terrier. I'm sorry. It has an impact on me. Every time I talk about the Terrier guided missile, I start thinking of you chucking West Highland Terriers at someone for some reason, and the fact that it comes from the Bumblebee project. Which I just love, the fact that the US Navy's efforts to develop surface-to-air missiles started off with a project called the Bumblebee Project. I want my Bumblebee. Sorry. It just... Again, the missile, there is a booster, which weighs roughly 830 kilograms, and a missile which weighs 540 kilograms, which is a combined weight of roughly 3,000 pounds, 1,400 kilograms, which is roughly 3,000 pounds. So again, you're gonna get hit by half a ton. Traveling at Mach 3. Again, that's not good. But again, 218 pound, that's 99 kilogram controlled fragmentation warhead, or a 1 kiloton nuclear warhead. The amount of nukes they are fitting at this point, it's like everything is going, but we've got a nuclear warhead for it. It's kind of like with today's arms sales, if you go to them, they always go, but there is an uncrewed option. And you're going, really? Tell me more. You can imagine the salesman this one going, yes, the accuracy is still developing, but there is a nuclear option. And the procurer is going, why, sir, tell me more. Basically, this is a nuclear cruiser in every form of the idea. And then they have the 5-inch 38, which, as I've said, is very reliable. But it's also a case of it's been around for a while by this point. It's really been around a while for this point.
There is a scenario going on here where you're sort of going, are we quite sure? Are we really sure we should still have this and not have provided a new thing? Just a new one? Anyway, let's get into her career. And her career starts off pretty cool. Originally, she was ordered as CGN-160. Again, more of the light guided missile cruiser. Then redesignated CGN-160, i.e. guided missile cruiser. Well, and then CGN-9 in July 1957. Because they realised just how many guided missile cruisers they had at that point. At commissioning, she was reported to have cost $320 million. That's roughly 3-point-something billion dollars in today's money. Now, the original estimate for her had been roughly $250 million. So she comes in at roughly 30% overprice. Under 30% overprice. Which, this will sound terrible, but in naval procurement terms of an experimental, never before done design with nuclear power built in the 1950s, that sounds to me almost like a bargain. And certainly like it's almost as coming in on budget. Because let's be honest, as is kind of traditional with all sellers, they more than likely under budgeted in order to secure the winning contract, and then tagged on and tagged on. Because that's what everyone seems to do. Now, I did talk about the phalanx close-in weapon systems. They were added later on in her career. They weren't initially fitted. And yeah, the Talos launcher at the rear had been removed for the Harpoon anti-ship missiles. Throughout her life, the ASROC and the 5-inch 38 guns were retained. In fact, they were the systems which lasted with her the longest. But all that's in front of her. At this point, she is going to take part in Operation Sea Orbit. Now, Operation Sea Orbit is a wonderful thing, and it's, again, the US Navy going around the world. And they're going around the world with nuclear power. They have Bainbridge, which is a nuclear-powered guided missile cruiser itself. Yes. Another one of them. She's ordered in 1958, laid down 59, launched 61. She doesn't, well, really starts out as a nuclear-powered guided missile destroyer leader, which the US Navy at the point was calling a frigate. Just to be confusing, the US Navy was calling that a frigate. But considering what they'd built for frigates in the Age of Sail, perhaps that does make sense. And, well, her and the Bainbridge class were then, were redesignated as guided missile cruisers in 1975. Because, well, they were nuclear powered and they carried a lot of missiles, and someone immediately realized, hang on, if cruisers because the Soviets are building cruisers, and B, do we really want officers of the level who we put in charge of destroyers at the current time going around in command of this amount of firepower? Or do we want to try and put more experienced officers? Because this was still in the period where cruisers tended to get more senior captains. They decided that they would go back to that. Anyway. Operation Sea Orbit took place in 1964. It was the idea and the project of Vice Admiral John S. McCain Jr. Not the one who became senator. Or did he become a senator? No, he didn't become a senator. That was his son who became a senator. So, He is John McCain. How many? There was the John McCain Senior, who was a Naval Aviation Task Force commander. They both. Oh yes, so he's John McCain number 2. Is the one John McCain I'm talking about. Don't worry, it's as bad as various Henrys and Georges. Sometimes you do need to work out with fingers and thumbs as a historian which George you're exactly talking about, or which Henry. And then the Edwards just get added in for extra fun. Just turn up. So, the plan was to sail around the world as kind of like a repeat of the Great White Fleet. It's basically America going, we're here, we're powerful, we've got all this nuclear power. E = mc squared. Yeah. So, it starts off with Long Beach and Bainbridge departing Norfolk on the 20th of April 1964. They were joined by Franklin D. Roosevelt, the very much not nuclear-powered Midway-class vessel, for the Atlantic crossing Mediterranean. In Mediterranean, they rendezvoused with the Enterprise. Task Force 1, that's what this would be called, formed up at Bahia de Palencia in Majorca, and then undertook various exercises to test the idea of an all-nuclear formation working together. At this point, after they were relieved on their post by the various other vessels which arrived, Franklin Roosevelt, of course, relieving Enterprise of its duties, the three ships took aboard maximum provisions to ensure there was no need to underway replenish while en route, and then they sail off. So, they are going to be gone from the 31st of July 1964 to the 3rd of October 1964. So, it goes August, September, start of October. We'll get to the Battle of Dong Hoi in a second. But what is this about? Well, this is about showing that A, the US Navy can sail around the world and could maybe catch up those Sveldods quite easily with one of their carriers without needing to replenish or support it, and it would still have some escorts with it. But also, and let's be honest, if someone turns around and goes, well, a Sveldov class with 6-inch guns could actually wreck the Long Beach. Yeah, but that thing's carrying Talos missiles with nuclear warheads, which would also wreck surface ships. They would. They don't really care what's on the receiving end. They will wreck it. The task force sails down on the west coast of Africa, calling her Rabat, Dakar, Freetown, Monrovia, Abidjan, and across the equator. Now, people get discussions when I'm talking about the Soviet Navy recently, going, oh, why are they sailing around the world? Well, the same reason the US Navy is sailing around the world. Showing the flag, showing the status, showing their capabilities. And one of the things the Soviet Navy picks up on, and this is a point to be made, is when they're building the ships they are building, is they're looking at what the Americans are doing and how successful it is for the Americans. The Soviets are very careful at analysing the politics and the impact of these ships sailing around the world. And let's be honest, both are picking up on the Royal Navy used to sail fleets around the world on a regular basis, squadrons calling all around the world, doing press visits and all those things as they went. Because it has an impact on the politics. It's a great status symbol to sail the fleet around the world. The Royal Navy recently got a brand new carrier in the service, Queen Elizabeth. Recently, in terms of how a historian views time. Anyway, her first major deployment, with a task group and everything, was to the South China Sea and back. Why? No, Britain is a member of NATO. We have all the commitments in the Mediterranean, the North Atlantic, staring off against the Russians up there, all those things. Why go to the Far East and back? Because you're sailing to the other side of the world and back. It's a statement, we can sail the whole way there and back. It's one stop below sailing a task group entirely around the world. And when you're sailing a task group entirely around the world, you can't pretend it's for any reasonable reason other than you showing off. But this is another reason why the nuclear-powered Kirovs, which I talked about again in the Soviet video, grew so large. Because if you want to sail around the world using nuclear power, you can on a surface ship. If you want to sail around the world and not have to call in for supplies unless you really want to, you're going to need a lot of space for food and refrigeration. They conducted an exercise with some South African ships at the Cape of Good Hope, and then they transited the Mozambique Channel into the Indian Ocean. They call it Mombasa. They went to Pakistan. They rendezvoused with some of the ships of the Pakistan Navy. They then called at Karachi. It was decided it was too dangerous for either Enterprise or Long Beach to enter the port, as it was really not good sea conditions. But Bainbridge went in, and the two larger ships anchored several miles off outside the harbour, watching everything. They then transited across the west coast of India before turning towards Australia. And whilst they were around Indonesia, they met up with HMS Victorious and her carrier battle group. Always nice to do that. Had a nice exercise with Victorious before they split it off to go to port calls at Fremantle for Bainbridge, Melbourne for Long Beach, and Sydney for Enterprise. You can see that if you look at this lovely sort of map here, where exactly they're all doing. And then the three ships reformed to transit New Zealand, where Bainbridge and Long Beach actually went into Wellington. And then they crossed the South Pacific Ocean, rounded Cape Horn, and came back up the Atlantic, visiting Buenos Aires, Montevideo. Entire task force puts into Rio de Janeiro. And then Bainbridge is sent to return to Charleston on the way back, whilst Enterprise and Long Beach return to Norfolk, arriving back on the 3rd of October 1964. They spent 65 days deployed, 57 of them at sea, had steamed 30,216 miles without replenishment. And Stream, the commander, Rear Admiral Bernard M. Stream, noted that the operating force meant that TF-1 could have been diverted to any other maritime area of the world without logistical considerations and could have been ready for immediate operations upon arrival. This was the advantage of nuclear power. It was expensive, but by gum does it give you logistics and advantages, because suddenly, and if you think about this in a ship when you're designing it, you don't have to worry about the space for fuel. Yes, your engine takes up more space, but you don't have to worry about fuel. You don't have to worry about the fuel you're putting in the hull at all. Admittedly, fuel can add to survivability, especially in how you design the fuel tanks, but you don't have to worry about where you're putting it. She also, during her career, took part in the Battle of Dong Hoi. Now, Dong Hoi is an interesting battle. It is sort of a battle which, how do I put this politely? I'm not really sure why it credits as a battle, but it does. And the reason I probably think that is because, again, I am coming from the perspective of someone who grew up reading about the events in the Mediterranean. And two MiG-17s, potentially some torpedo boats, attacking a cruiser, a pair of destroyers, and a frigate does not seem to be that many. Now, the Vietnamese claimed 2, the US claimed 3 MiG-17s. The
Vietnamese claim no casualties. The US claimed they shot down a MiG-17 and sunk 2 torpedo boats. But the US also say they had 4 wounded, a destroyer damaged, and a cruiser damaged. The only cruiser there wasn't the Long Beach. Wasn't Long Beach. However, she is credited shortly afterwards with getting a combat action ribbon for action on 26th of April 1972. Now, this suggests to me there are more events than just those which are described in the Battle of Dong Hae officially, which take place on the 19th of April 1972, and I wouldn't be surprised if a few days later the Vietnamese decided to follow up by trying to attack another cruiser. And, well, attacking Long Beach was probably not the sensible idea, because of the cruisers, of the 2 options to actually attack, Oklahoma City is one of the, well, converted Cleveland class. And when I say converted, I mean converted in loosely terms, cruisers. She's a good vessel, but she's a Galveston-class guided missile cruiser, and, you know, not that massive. Long Beach has a lot more capability in terms of its radar. So, you get into the 1980s, and, well, Aegis is starting to come about, and actually someone does work out what she'd look like if they did an Aegis upgrade. And that does look like there's been a big sort of hangar implanted onto her. They have changed to the Aegis radars. I'm thinking there would have been a helicopter hangar facility fitted from those sort of designs. It looks to me like they are carrying on with the standard missiles, which she'd already been fitted with by that point in her career, but she's now got the new 5-inch gun, which is a nice upgrade, and that's now mounted front and centre. Honestly, I would have loved to have seen this in service. In fact, I would love to have seen the US Navy continue with nuclear-powered cruisers after, instead of going with destroyer leaders. Because I think if we go back to this Operation Seabed, I think if you're going to have carriers which have nuclear power, and it's a tremendous advantage from a logistics perspective that they only have to concentrate on carrying fuel for their air group and maybe fuel for their escorts, you should probably have for each carrier at least one escort which has similar advantages. I can understand why you don't, but having a nuclear vessel and calling it a cruiser because it's a nuclear powered vessel and only having those, having one per carrier, would seem to me to have been a sensible course to have treaded. It doubles your surface nuclear reactor force, which doubles the number of personnel you have going through those training, doubling a pool for selections of senior posts, and which makes things better for that, maintaining that force structure. But also, it means if your carrier really does need a pulse and move from area to area, there's an escort which can keep up with her, and is similarly unencumbered by the need of fuel. Yes, I do realise with the carrier carrying its own fuel to resupply its escorts, it can surge ahead, and as long as the escorts can keep up with it, that's good. But that still requires a lot more complication. And you could still do that for the majority of your escorts, but with one of them which didn't need to worry about that, that does then add in options. That adds in options for your picketing, and adds in options for your force structure. I think again though, this architect, this drawer has some sort of desires to, well, honestly, when I looked at this, I went, have they been looking at the second wave of tribal destroyers designed for the Royal Canadian Navy? Because it does sort of give off those sort of vibes. The ships which the Canadian Navy had in service until the Halifax class frigates came in service, and it was the case of these destroyers were actually smaller than the Halifax. But it does look kind of like that sort of design. I like the Long Beach. I don't want to get into some of the details about her career because honestly they are quite recent, and speaking as a historian, I know enough to know when I am probably not hearing the full story, and I'm definitely not reading the full story. This is why I don't write history on modern vessels, and why normally I keep discussions on modern ships to bilge pumps. And to an extent, I go more recent because of my PhD in war studies, and I'm used to dealing with more recent ships. But I also know I can be more fulsome in a way about the careers of ships which were further back, because I tend to have enough sources to put it together, but also there is, how to put this, more candour available, because there's less people still around who can be affected by it. There is an interesting discussion, I think, for the rest of the nuclear cruisers, which were all basically nuclear destroyers. I can understand getting rid of them. And I think if this ship had been a heavy cruiser-shaped hull, it would have been a far cheaper upgrade to Aegis. In which case, I do wonder if it might have stayed, because it had served rather well in the Gulf War. Taking part in Desert Storm, Provide Comfort, and Fiery Vigil, escorting the Missouri. But I think part of the reason for her loss is the fact that they looked at the cost of upgrading her to Aegis. And that would have required her superstructure to be completely rebuilt, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Not if we consider the design. That would have been a very cute design. But I do notice that design is done in a period before they really have VLS launches thought about for it. Because again, the thinking about the sheer number of VLS which could have been factored into this vessel's hull, goodness gracious me, if they had, and this is the point it's making, is probably the US Navy might think they made a sensible choice here. Because if they had kept this ship in service, had adapted with VLS, and turned into some kind of super warship, actually getting it, considering the amount of trouble the US Navy has gone through to try and finally get rid of the TCOs, and all the issues at the Ticonderoga class, and all the issues with them, which I'll be covering at some point in the video in this series, actually trying to get rid of a nuclear-powered Aegis cruiser with VLS at this current time, with all the current issues going on, this would probably be a very old ship still in service. I have a feeling the US Navy would have actually been forced to build a modern equivalent of it. There would be a nuclear... Basically, I can tell you now what would happen, okay? They'd have built a fourth Zumwalt hull, as they were constructing it, and that would have been the nuclear-powered Zumwalt, and that would have been the replacement. There's part of me which wants to see the nuclear-powered Zumwalt. Oh, well, leaving that to one side. Summary. Useful ship. Did some amazing feats for the US Navy. Would have been useful to have kept in service a little bit longer. I can understand the reasoning that goes into decommissioning her. But if you consider how long Enterprise stays in service. Enterprise, which, well, ordered in 1957, laid down 58, launched 1960, actually commissioned 1961, only stricken in 2017, it tells you how long a nuclear-powered ship of sufficient size to be upgraded and modified and well maintained can serve. Can serve. Let's be honest, that's 56 years roughly between commissioning and strikening. If we take that back to Long Beach, well, she's commissioned also in September 1961. She's decommissioned in May 1995, had been deactivated in July 1994. So she was only 33 years old. Less than 33 years old. She could have easily given the US Navy another 20 years. As said, it would have been interesting watching current Congress deal with her decommissioning. The Battle of Cornell, in retrospect. Coming up on the 6th of January. Right, and what do we have the rest of the week? Well, I'm going to be recording in a few minutes, actually, this evening. Had a few delays today, but recording in a few minutes. The Kara class, the Slava class, and then we've got Warrior on Thursday, Haida on Sunday, which is Christmas Day. Hope you're looking forward to Christmas, or whatever you're doing this time of year, and having a good time with family. That's what we should be doing in this period. Unless, of course, you're in Australia and it's summer, in which case, for you, in which case I suggest beach parties. Honestly, beach parties. If you're in the southern hemisphere, go and have fun in the sun. Enjoy yourself. If you're in the northern hemisphere, I recommend getting together with friends and family somewhere warm and enjoying yourself that way. Right then. We also have the Soviet Navy's live on Friday. That's going to be a long one. A good one. US nuclear-powered cruisers. The 30th of the 12th, 2022. That's a video I'm looking forward to because I'm going to be doing as a sort of combined video, even though I've done this one individually, because I want to talk through the reasoning going on behind both them and, well, how do I put this price? The Bainbridge class and the conversions and why they end up the way they are. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. And yeah, actually, this is going to be my question. Did have one question, but I've changed my mind on the question. The question is going to be, what hull do you think would have been converted if this vessel had stayed in longer? And taking the recalcitrance of US Senate to get rid of the Aegis hulls, what would they have insisted replaced this? What hull would the US Navy have gone with to regenerate a nuclear-powered cruiser should they have to replace the Long Beach with a like-for-like capability? Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and take care.